versus mortality rates. Organ donation rates are drastically different in opt-in versus opt-out countries. People just stick with the default frame. We passively accept the frame we're given unless there's a strong reason and the mental effort available to reframe it. Remember the calculator example.
Saving $5 on a $15 calculator feels like a bigger deal than saving $5 on a $125 one.
Right. People are much more willing to drive across town for the $5 saving on the cheaper item. Why? Because they framed the saving relative to the item's price mental accounting or topical accounts. $5 seems like a huge chunk of $15, but a tiny fraction of $125. System 2 didn't step back and realize the effort was the same. The saving was the same $5 absolute amount.
So our decisions are really shaped by these psychological factors: reference points, loss aversion, probability weighting, framing. Much more than pure logic.
That's the core message of prospect theory. And the idea of narrow versus broad framing is key here too. Samuelson's colleague rejecting one good bet, $100 loss, $200 gain, 50-50, but accepting 100 of them.
Right, because individually the loss looms large, but aggregated, the gain is obvious.
Exactly. Narrow framing focuses on the single instance, amplifying loss aversion. Broad framing looks at the portfolio, the long run, allowing the positive expected value to dominate. Individuals often suffer from narrow framing. Organizations or savvy individuals making repeated decisions like investing benefit from adopting broad framing a risk policy, evaluating performance over longer periods, not reacting to every small dip. It helps mitigate the costly effects of loss aversion.
This is fascinating. It really changes how you think about thinking. Okay, let's shift focus slightly to something really personal. Well-being. The source material introduces this idea of two different selves.
Yes, this is a really important distinction for understanding happiness and life satisfaction. There's the experiencing self and the remembering self.
Okay, tell me about them.
The experiencing self is the one living life moment by moment. It feels the pleasure of a good meal, the pain of a headache, the engagement of a good conversation, right as it happens. It lives in the present.
And the remembering self.
The remembering self is the storyteller, the scorekeeper. It looks back on past experiences, evaluates them, creates narratives about your life, and critically, it's the one that makes decisions about the future based on those memories.
And the remembering self isn't always accurate about what the experiencing self actually went through.
Not at all. The remembering self is subject to some powerful biases.
Yeah.
The two big ones are the peak end rule and duration neglect.
Peak end and duration neglect.
When the remembering self evaluates a past episode, a vacation, a movie, a medical procedure, it doesn't simply sum up all the moments of pleasure or pain. Instead, its overall judgment is determined heavily by two things: the feeling at the peak moment, the most intense point, good or bad, and the feeling right at the end. And it largely ignores the duration of the experience.
Ignores how long it lasted. That seems weird.
It does. The cold hand experiment demonstrated this vividly. People put their hand in painfully cold water. In one condition, it lasted, say, 60 seconds. In another condition, it lasted 90 seconds. The first 60 seconds were identical, but the last 30 seconds were slightly less cold, though still unpleasant.
So the second trial had more total pain, right? 30 extra seconds of discomfort?
Objectively, yes. More total suffering for the experiencing self. But when asked which trial they'd prefer to repeat, most people chose the longer one. Because the remembering self had a slightly better memory of it. The peak pain was the same in both, but the end was slightly less awful in the longer trial. So the memory, shaped by the less painful end, was better, even though the experience itself was objectively worse. They chose based on the memory, prioritizing a less unpleasant memory over less actual time spent.
We actually choose more suffering than a slightly better memory of it later.
Wow.
It shows the power of the remembering self in driving our choices. Duration neglect is also striking when evaluating whole lives. Example of Jen's life. Is a life of 30 happy years better or worse than a life of 60 equally happy years, or the last 5 are only mildly pleasant? People struggle with this, often evaluate based on the overall narrative or ending, not just summing up the total duration of happiness. It's another less is more effect, like the condition system one averages or uses prototypes. It doesn't sum duration well.
So our choices might be aimed at creating good memory for the remembering self, sometimes even if it makes the present experience worse. Absolutely. Think about vacations. Are you optimizing for a relaxing, enjoyable moment now, experiencing self? Or are you focused on getting the perfect photos, hitting all the landmarks, collecting stories to tell later, remembering self? The tourist constantly framing shots of the camera is arguably prioritizing the future memory over present experience.
This is the difference between being happy in your life versus being happy with your life.
Exactly. There are distinct concepts. Experienced well-being is about quality of your moments, how much time you spend feeling positive emotions versus negative ones. It can be measured by tracking feelings throughout the day, like with the index of pleasant time. Life satisfaction, on the other hand, is global judgment. It's the story remembering self tells when asked, overall, how satisfied are you with your life?
And things like money affect this differently.
They do. Research consistently shows that higher income correlates much more strongly with life satisfaction than does with experienced well-being. Once your basic needs are met, more money doesn't seem to buy much more moment-to-moment happiness, but it does tend to make people feel more satisfied when they step back and evaluate their life story.
And the focus illusion misses with that life satisfaction judgment too.
Big time. When you're asked to evaluate your overall life satisfaction, whatever aspect of your life happens to be on your mind at that moment gets disproportionate weight. Classic study compared Californians and Westerners.
Right, about weather.
Exactly. When asked specifically about climate satisfaction, Californians were happier, Midwesterners less so. No surprise. But when asked about overall life satisfaction, there was no significant difference between groups. However, if they were asked about the climate first, that brought climate top of mind, and then their overall life satisfaction ratings were affected. Californians rated themselves happier overall, Midwesterners less happy. Focusing on climate made it seem much more important to overall well-being than actually was their daily experience. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is when you're thinking about it.
Wow. And goals play a big role in remembering self-story.
A huge role. Goals set early in life are strong predictors of later life satisfaction. If your goal is to make money and you succeed, you tend to report high satisfaction. If you want money and didn't get it, satisfaction tends to be lower. Interestingly, even pursuing noble but difficult goals, like becoming a successful performing artist, can lead to lower life satisfaction if you don't achieve them, regardless of how happy your day-to-day life might be. The remembering self-narrative of achieving goals is critical for that overall evaluation.
So well-being is complicated. It's not just one thing.
Definitely not. It requires considering both elves.
Yeah.
Maybe policy should focus on reducing misery, helping the experiencing self, as well as providing opportunities for achievement and a positive life narrative, satisfying the remember self. And personally, maybe focusing on how you spend your time prioritizing engaging in enjoyable activities is a direct route to improving experience well-being.
Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground here. The two systems, heuristics, biases, illusions of understanding, prospect theory, the two selves. It really paints a picture of a mind that's powerful, deeply flawed, or at least predictably quirky. The huge question now is, knowing all this, can we actually do anything about it? Can we make better judgments and decisions?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the short answer is, it's really hard. Biases aren't just simple mistakes you can easily correct with information. They're deeply embedded in the automatic operations of System 1. You can't just decide not to see them or rely on illusion, right? The lines still look different lengths even when you know they're not.
We'll feel confident in a prediction even when you know that that's bad.
Exactly. The intuitive feeling often persists even when System 2 knows better. So overcoming biases isn't about limiting System 1, which is impossible and wouldn't even be desirable. It's incredibly efficient most of the time. It's more about learning to recognize the situations what's likely to lead you astray and engage System 2 more deliberately.
So what are the strategies? How to start?
Well, the first step, maybe the most important, is just awareness. Simply knowing about these common biases, availability, representativeness, anchoring, loss aversion, hindsight bias, overconfidence. The planning fallacy gives you vocabulary. You can start to label your own thoughts, the arguments of others. That sounds like availability, or is that anchored? Recognizing pattern is prerequisite to doing anything about it.
And consciously trying to slow down and engage System 2.
Definitely. When the stakes are high, when decision really matters, or when you just get that feeling that an answer came too easily, that's a cue to deliberately slow down. Mobilize System 2. Question the initial intuition. Ask yourself, why do I believe this? What evidence supports it? What evidence contradicts it? Are there alternate explanations? It takes effort, but it's necessary.
And actively seeking out base rates. Fighting that urge to just go with a compelling story.
Yes. Make conscious effort to find and consider relevant statistical information. Don't let a vivid anecdote or a stereotype completely overshadow the broader picture. Ask, what is the overall frequency? What happened in the typical case? This takes discipline because System 1 finds story is much more appealing than statistics.
The outside view seems like a really practical tool for planning.
It's probably one of the single most effective debiasing techniques for forecasts and plans. To combat planning fallacy, our natural tendency to be overly optimistic about costs, timelines, and risks. Don't just focus on the specific of your project, the inside view. Instead, deliberately take the outside view. Identify a class of similar past projects, the reference class, and look at actual outcomes. What were their real costs? How long they really take? What were the common pitfalls? Grounding your forecast in the statistical reality of similar cases is incredibly powerful. Bent Fliger calls the most important advice for accurate forecasting.
Using joint evaluation also sounds help comparing things side by side.
Yes. Whenever possible, evaluate options together rather than one at a time. This makes it easy for System 2 to make direct comparisons of relevant attributes and reduces the impact of biases like anchoring or emotional intensity matching that dominate when we see things in isolation. The punitive damages example where judgments were more consistent when different cases were seen together illustrates this. Joint evaluation engages System 2's comparative abilities.
And for decisions we make repeatedly, we try to take like trace. Adopt a broad frame.
For decisions that are part of a larger portfolio or sequence like investments, maybe even hiring decisions where time adopting broad framing can counteract the effects of narrow framing and loss aversion. Try to evaluate the overall strategy of the long-term results rather than being overly focused on the gain or loss of each individual instance. Think quarterly, not daily for your investments perhaps. It encourages a more rational approach to risk over time.
And don't forget algorithms and checklists for predictable stuff.
Absolutely. In environments where prediction is possible and data exists, don't underestimate the power of simple formulas or structured checklists. They outperform unaided intuition surprisingly often because they are consistent and immune to many human biases. Use them where appropriate hiring, medical protocol, investment rules. Don't let ego or the illusion of scale prevent you from using tools that prove to work better.
Finally, just being critical and seeing outside perspectives.
Be skeptical of your uncertainty, especially when feeling highly confident. Actively seek out different viewpoints and critical feedback, not just confirmation, and try hard to evaluate past decisions based on the process and the information available then, not just on the outcome you know now, fighting hindsight bias. And always ask yourself about framing. Could this be presented differently? Would that change your choice? Am I using the most helpful frame?
So it's not about becoming perfectly rational, but more about becoming aware, more deliberate, more humble about our intuitive maybe.
I think it's a great way to put it. It requires ongoing effort and vigilance. It's about understanding the machinery of your mind, recognizing its works, and knowing when to trust your gut versus when to pause, question, and perhaps bring in more systematic thinking or external aids. Value isn't just better decisions, it's a richer, more nuanced understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
We have taken a really deep dive today, exploring the fascinating interplay between our fast automatic thinking and our slow, effortful reasoning. We've uncovered how those useful mental shortcuts can sometimes lead us into predictable traps, these biases, shaping everything from how we remember the past to the choices we make about the future and even how we feel about our own lives.
And these concepts, they aren't just, abstract psychological theories. They're playing out constantly in your everyday life, influencing how you react to news headlines, how you manage your finances, how you evaluate people you meet, how you experience your own day.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, considering just how easily our judgments, our preferences, can be swayed by the way a question is framed, by a random number we just saw, by the selective stories our remembering self chooses to tell, it leaves us with, I think, a really interesting question for you to ponder. How much of what we consider to be our rational, independent decision-making is actually just our sophisticated system 2 working overtime, finding clever justifications for the immediate, intuitive, and sometimes deeply biased responses that are automatically generated by our ever-present, ever-active System 1.
That's a deep one to end on. Makes you think.
It does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope it's giving you some powerful insights and definitely plenty to think about.